The information provided in the Golden Nuggets health and wellness shows, including but not limited to advice, tips, and discussions on mental, physical, and spiritual well-being, is intended for general information purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional advice or treatment. The Golden Nuggets health and wellness shows are designed to inspire and inform, promoting a holistic approach to health for the mind, body, and soul. However, individual circumstances vary, and what works for one person may not be suitable for another. Before making any significant changes to your lifestyle, diet, exercise routine, or adopting new practices discussed on the show, it is strongly recommended that you consult with qualified healthcare professionals, nutritionists, or other relevant experts. They can provide personalized advice based on your specific needs, health status, and any existing medical conditions. The host, guest, and producers of the Golden Nuggets health and wellness shows do not assume responsibility for any consequences arising from the use or misuse of the information provided. Viewers and listeners are encouraged to use their discretion and take responsibility for their own health choices. By engaging with the Golden Nuggets health and wellness shows, you acknowledge that the content is not a substitute for professional advice and that you will seek the guidance of qualified professionals when needed. Thank you for being a part of the health and wellness community.
Welcome to Golden Nuggets Health and Wellness Show, the television program that's redefining self-care for the mind, body, and soul. My name is Dr. Elect Starr. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, health and wellness consultant, and your host for this show. Our mission is simple: to empower you with creative and innovative self-care strategies that help you prosper and be in good health, even as your soul prospers. In our first series entitled Compassion Fatigue, The Cost of Caring, we dive into the emotional and physical exhaustion experienced by helping professionals. We explore what compassion fatigue is, who's at risk, its signs and symptoms, and most importantly, the steps to address and prevent it. But before we begin, allow me to introduce our special guest. Brenda Golder. Hello.
Hello, Dr. Starr.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
It's wonderful to have you on the show today.
Thank you.
Do you mind telling us just a little bit about you before we begin?
Okay, I am married. I have been for 42 years.
42.
A wonderful man.
Wow.
And we have 3 sons and 6 grandchildren.
6 grandchildren.
Yes.
Wow.
And we love spending time with family. I love spending time with family. And I would love to do my hobbies that I have, but I don't have time. So I do have a few hobbies. I love roller skating. I love playing word games. And I love going to church and fellowshipping with the saints.
Beautiful. Thank you. Before we begin just asking questions to you and addressing your experience, processing your experience with compassion fatigue, I'd like to just begin by talking about what compassion fatigue is. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. So what is compassion fatigue? That's the big question here today. Compassion fatigue is a gradual decline in compassion. It's where your compassion begins to decrease over a period of time, and it's just not compassion for others, but it's also compassion for yourself. So can you imagine working in a healthcare capacity where you're caring for people and then gradually losing that compassion for others and yourself? I'm sure you can see how it can have an impact in your care for others. But compassion fatigue is also this profound emotional and physical exhaustion that helping professionals and caregivers like yourself can develop over the course of the time as you help others. And lastly, compassion fatigue has this detrimental effect. It can decrease your productivity. It can bring absenteeism in your workplace, inability to focus, and the development of new feelings such as incompetency and self-doubt. So that is what compassion fatigue is in a nutshell. So my goal is to approach this topic with sensitivity and empathy, as it can be emotionally charged for caregivers. Also, my goal is to help, just shed light on the experiences and challenges faced by caregivers. So to begin, Brenda, I'd like for you to share, if you will, your personal experience as a caregiver and when you first realized you were experiencing compassion fatigue.
Okay. I am a full-time caregiver of my mother, excuse me, who's the matriarch of our family. She is 93.
93.
And will be 94 in May, if God says the same. And she pretty much, up until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, was pretty independent. So it kind of happened overnight. She got ill. She injured herself first, and then she was ill from that injury. And so we had to, instead of going with our plans to care for our mother, we kind of had to just jump in there kind of pretty abruptly. And she lived in another state. She lived in Michigan. So we had to move her here to Indiana. And in doing that, the plans that we had in place had to be altered because of her not being able to go up and down stairs at that time. So I became the full-time caregiver once she had contracted COVID. She got very sick. She got very sick then. And so it was my decision to take her into our home and care for her and nurse her back. That was a very scary, challenging time because she couldn't really help herself at all at that time. That went on for approximately 6 months before she really regained her strength and started to become a little bit more independent. But because of her age, she lost a few things with that sickness. And so because of that, it became more challenging because she, like I said, she was a very independent woman and still wanted to be, but couldn't be. And so that became a battle for us. And it's difficult to have to pull rank on someone that raised you, that was independent, that, you know, now you have to make all the decisions and you have to care for them. And almost like the tables turned from me being the child, her being the mother, to flipping to almost me being like a mother and her being the child. Because it was just that much difference. But we have worked through some things and it has gotten better. We've had some challenges with family because everybody's not always in agreement to what should take place and how it should happen. So, but in spite of that, I was able to still be able to handle some of the things that she needed handled. When I felt compassion fatigue was when first I didn't realize what that was.
Sure.
I had a talk with you initially, and then I got to thinking and I was like, wow, that's what I'm experiencing. I didn't realize it though. I realized it mostly once I got away from it. So I was able to step away, take a vacation, and then I realized, wow, I didn't realize how much stress I was under. Wow. I was under a great deal of stress, under a lot of emotional stress, mental, physical, all of that. But when you're in the trenches and when you're caring for your loved one, you don't think about that. You don't even think about self-care or none of that. You think about getting them better and helping them have the best life that you can give them. So
that's beautiful. I admire you. You said that you decided You didn't have a conversation with siblings and ask, okay, who's going to help with this? Who's going to share? You decided to do this.
Well,
wow, what a heart of compassion.
It was not a hard decision because I saw the need, and I knew the resources within the family. I had the most flexible schedule. The suggestion was to put my mother in a nursing home initially, and I did not want to do that. I would never want to do that if I can help it, because I feel like she would thrive better, or any loved one will thrive better in the home with a loved one, as opposed to in a place with strangers. So I made the decision. It wasn't welcomed at first because I had siblings, and we did discuss some things. We did, but I just made the decision that she would stay with us because I actually consulted her doctor, and her doctor said she would get the best of care if she's home with loved ones. She was too weak to really go to a rehabilitation center or a nursing home anyway. So when she told me that, it was an easy decision. Well, then she stays here.
And what I think also is interesting that you said when you're in the trenches, you don't realize. You're just so obsessed with the caring,
Yes.
or consumed with the caring, that you don't know what's happening to you. And it wasn't until you removed yourself, you said.
Right, until I stepped away. When I stepped away, I'm blessed to have a wonderful son who, he works in healthcare, and he knows his mom. And I guess he saw the stress on me. And so he chose to give me a trip to where he lives. And I thought I was going there and then I would take care of my grandkids. He has 2 sons. I said, well, he probably wants me to come here, take care of the kids, let him and his wife go out and, so they can have some time. But it was not that at all. He literally brought me there and spent time with me, took me to the beach, and did not take the family. It was strictly, and that's when I just kind of realized, wow, I didn't know, when out there on the beach and watching the waters, I was like, wow. I mean, I didn't know how stressed I was. When I first got there, I slept and slept and slept.
Wow.
Didn't realize how tired I was.
Thank
Like
God
I
for your
said,
son.
yeah, I do all the time.
That's amazing. But you, from that experience, you know that compassion fatigue exists. It's real.
Definitely.
And it does take a toll on you.
It does.
And you said you explained how you slept for how long?
It was the first couple of days, it was, I was like, we don't have to do anything. I did.
So that exhaustion was real.
It was real. And you get irritated and don't even know why you're irritated. I mean, just a lot of things happen to me that I didn't even recognize. Didn't know how tired I was. Like I said, when you're in the trenches, my mom, her blood pressure was dropping dangerously low. So you're stressed because, for me, I don't want anything to happen on my watch. So I'm trying to make sure I do everything that I can do to make sure she's okay, especially when you have family members who are not in agreement.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that very touching story. We're going to take a break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to look at who's at risk. We're going to look at the signs and symptoms, because I think that is important. You said you didn't know those signs and symptoms. You didn't even know what compassion fatigue was. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct.
So we're going to come back and we're going to just explore who's at risk here. I know therapists are, and I know, as you've shared, caregivers are. Are there others out there who are at risk? So we're going to take a look at that, and thank you again. It's just wonderful having you here, and I'm sure that our audience is enjoying as well. Our listening audience out there can relate. I'm sure there are caregivers out there that can relate. So we're going to take a break, and we'll come back.
Feeling Feeling anxious? Perhaps you're dealing with a past trauma and don't know where to turn for help. Turn to Unlimited Possibilities. We provide a safe and caring space for individuals and families to help improve the quality of their lives. Whether you need help with spiritual matters, trauma, depression, and more, Unlimited Possibilities can help you overcome your situation with compassion, acceptance, respect, and empowerment. Unlimited Possibilities, where all things are possible if you believe. Call or visit our website today. Dr. Starr, best-selling author of Golden Nuggets, Food for the Mind, Body, and Soul, is also a health and wellness speaker and consultant who provides motivational speaking, training conferences, and one-on-one coaching to improve the quality of life. She's passionate about helping people heal from the inside out. Dr. Starr provides creative and innovative self-care strategies that empower you to prosper and be in good health, even as your soul prospers. Call or visit the Golden Nuggets website today.
And welcome back to Golden Nuggets. We're so glad that you are back with us. And with us today, we have our beautiful guest, Brenda Golder. And we've had a wonderful conversation about compassion fatigue. And she shared a touching story. Oh my, a story of love and a story of compassion. And I was just so deeply touched by your sharing. And so what we want to do, we want to talk about who is at risk. Well, I know as a therapist, we're at risk. Caregiver here is also affirming that caregivers are at risk. But are there others out there? Well, let me just begin by saying that those in the helping field are profoundly affected by the work they do. So we're talking those who have direct exposure to traumatic events. And so that would include firefighters, paramedics, policemen. They are directly involved with the trauma, with the victims of trauma. And then we have what's called secondary exposure, and those involve doctors, nurses, social workers, therapists, pastors, pastors' wives, caregivers. We're talking foster care parents, even guardians, grandparents can also experience compassion fatigue, because you think of people, anybody who is working with individuals who are suffering, whether it's homelessness, whether it's sickness, depression, fatigue, sometimes even grief and loss, trying to comfort someone who's struggling with the loss. So any of these individuals who are in that helping field, helping people who are hurting, are at risk. And so I want to ask our beautiful guests here, can you share a success story or a turning point in your journey where you began to manage your compassion fatigue? I know you shared the story about being away with your son on the beach, but after you got back and you had this new understanding of, wow, I didn't realize just how exhausted I was. You said you slept for days, right?
Yeah.
Couple of days?
Couple days.
So can you share this turning point in your journey where you began to manage that differently? Did you do things differently upon your return from visiting your son?
Yes, I did. Actually, my son and I had a lot of time to talk, and he emphasized self-care to me. And Mom, you have to take out time for yourself, and da-da-da. And I've heard that enough, I've heard it. But in this situation, it's a little different than, I have other obligations. I'm a legal guardian for one of my relatives, and that takes up some time. So he would say that regarding that situation. But this situation is different because my mom's in my home. And so as my mom got her strength back and started feeling better, then there were more demands, and not, like demands, but, more requests to do this, do that. And so it was difficult to juggle her desires with my schedule. So what I had to do is set aside a day or two. Okay, these days will be for you. And then on these days, I'm gonna have to do these things that I need to do for me. So I saw a decrease in stress because I intentionally made time for myself. That is difficult for me because I'm just one who helps, and that's just who I am. But in doing so, I've had to learn how to space out the time that I need for me, give space for the time that I need for me, and still have that time for my mother. I never want her to feel like she's a burden to me. I think that's something that you just don't want to do as a caregiver, as a daughter, as a,
Absolutely.
you know what I mean? So you don't want them to feel like they're a bother. So for me, stepping back and being able to pull away for a little bit and see how much stress I was under, coming back, I was able to manage my calendar a little better, spacing her appointments out that I could space out to benefit me and my time frame that I needed to have. So because before I would just, whenever the doctor says she needed an appointment, okay, I put it on my calendar, then I'd look and I'm like, ooh, I'd have 2 other appointments that day too. So I started making sure that I check that calendar first and see if that works, instead of, becoming overwhelmed like I would sometimes because I had so much on the calendar. She sees quite a few specialists, and so we have appointments a lot. And then, of course, my own appointments. And so what I would do is space them out so that if they'd say, well, she can come back in 4 to 6 weeks, I'd make it 6 weeks, sometimes, depending on which person that was, so.
Smart, very smart. And that is a strategy, setting boundaries, managing your time, organizing. Absolutely, very good. Thank you for sharing that.
Welcome.
So I'm thinking about those signs and symptoms. You said you were in the trenches and you really didn't realize it.
No.
Although the symptoms were there, right?
Yeah, they were there.
And I'm wondering how many more caregivers are out there experiencing the same thing, in the trenches, caring for loved ones, but not aware of those signs and symptoms. And I'm thinking if they were aware of the signs and symptoms, do you think that would make a difference?
I think so. I think had I known and could recognize the symptoms, I probably would have changed my strategy sooner. I didn't get burnt out, but at sometimes I felt overwhelmed. And so I would say for anybody who's a caregiver, if you have resources, if you can reach out for help, do that. And if you
Absolutely.
have other family members, I have siblings in the city, I have nieces, my mom has grandchildren, encourage her to do that. And I usually encourage her to ask them rather than me.
Good.
Because I think
you're empowering her.
Yeah, I just encourage her to do it, and otherwise you can get overwhelmed and you don't want to get burnt out.
I like that. So you're allowing her to do what she can do.
Exactly.
Excellent. Well, I want to just share some of those signs and symptoms. So you've mentioned it already, exhaustion. So you have that mental, physical, emotional exhaustion. And it's a sense of, you described it, feeling overwhelmed. I mean, you hit it on the nail, drained, emotionally depleted. And then there's this decreased empathy. Now, I don't hear that from you, but it can happen to some caregivers where they have difficulty feeling that same level of empathy that they did, that same level of compassion that they started out with. It just begins to decrease. And that can lead to a sense of detachment, where you're just going through the motions, like on autopilot. That's one of the signs. And then there's this intrusive imagery or thoughts, where you can just be having a conversation and just suddenly you have these reoccurring thoughts of the person or something they shared with you. Or even waking up in the middle of the night sometimes and you can't get this image out of your head. That's another sign and symptom. Can you relate to those?
I can relate definitely to the exhaustion, and not just physically, but mentally. I think because of that, I had to deal with insomnia more than I've ever dealt with it before. Because sometimes when I would get her situated and, she's in bed, then it was almost like I could, take a breath and sit down and try to relax. But instead of relaxing, my mind just kept going over the day, or say if it was a day that the blood pressure was higher than I wanted to be, then I'm thinking in terms of, okay, so how's she really doing? What is my next step? What do I need to do? So sometimes I think I have suffered with insomnia, just thinking about everything.
Yeah.
Too many things at the same time.
So is it that unconscious worrying?
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, increased irritability. Did I hear you say that earlier?
Yeah.
I thought you hit that one on the nail too.
Yeah, I did. And I think it's because for my mom, sometimes you felt like, well, you'll do this, you'll do that to satisfy her, and it didn't satisfy her. And especially, I think it's at her age, they don't ever kind of know what they want to eat. The appetite has decreased so much. And so that makes it hard to figure out, okay, well, then you fix this. No, they don't want that. It's just, and it can be frustrating, irritating. And it seems like they're not grateful. But I know my mom is truly grateful. So, but you get irritated because it's like, you do this, that's not working. You do this, so.
That makes a lot of sense.
So it kind of irritates you a little bit. But.
Well, this is all good stuff. And if you've noticed, you've described many of the symptoms. So you're very aware of what is going on in your world. What I'd like to do, I want you to come back and let's continue this discussion because there's so much more. I appreciate you being here today, and I think you've brought a wealth of information, and I'm sure that there are caregivers who have been inspired by your sharing. And what we want them to prosper. All caregivers, we want them to prosper, be in good health, even as their soul prospers. So we're going to come back in our next show, and we're going to continue this discussion of the symptoms. I think it is so important.
It is.
To know what those symptoms, those signs are of compassion fatigue. But we don't want to stop there. We want to talk about what are the steps to address and prevent it, right? We don't want to spend time just talking about the problem.
Right.
We want to have solutions.
Yeah.
So I'd like for you to come back and join us, and let's continue that discussion. How does that sound with you?
Sounds good.
Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us today. I hope you have been inspired. I've been inspired by this beautiful story of love and compassion and commitment. Commitment. There's a saying that you can't walk through water and not get wet. So as a caregiver, it's really impossible for you to care in day out and not be impacted on some level. Even if you're doing the best self-care you could possibly do, because you're human, you will feel some effects of compassion fatigue. So the saying is, the higher the level of compassion, the higher the risk for compassion fatigue. Because as you care, you open yourself up to experiencing the risk. That makes sense?
Yes.
So I look forward to having you come back and join us as we continue our discussion. We're going to continue the discussion on the signs and symptoms, and then we're going to end with what can we do about it? How can we prevent it? How can we minimize? I think that's the more appropriate word, minimize. So thank you for joining us. Until then, goodbye for now.